You're on.
So today we're going to be talking about openings. We talk a lot about middle game, end games, and puzzles. But today I figure we should do something on the opening. And I have an opening in mind I want us to go through. Actually, there are two of them. One is the French defense, and one is the King's Indian defense. So, and I'm going to explain some things about pawn structure based on these openings. You know, because the pawns always give you an idea of what you need to do in every kind of game you play. So the first one I'm going to go over is the French defense. So white plays e4. Of course, we always told to move our pawn 2 steps wide to control at most squares in the center, and then allow our pieces to get to the game. So after the move e4, black plays e6. This is known as the French defense. It's a very solid defense. It could be very annoying to play against the French. The idea of e6 is to play d5 to try to fight for the central squares. So white plays d4, and this is what I always say. Anytime you play a game and your opponent gives you the chance of occupying these 2 squares with pawns, go ahead and do it. It has to be a good move. It has to be a good move. So after the move d4, black plays d5. Now, like I said earlier, the idea of d5 is to fight for the control of the central square. So pretty much the d5 pawn is challenging the e pawn. There are 2 possible moves here. There is, well, more than 2. There is the capture on d5, which is called the French exchange. Captures, it captures back. Okay. There is knight to c3. This is called the Winawa variation. Okay. There is knight to d2. This is called the Taraj variation. Now, the reason why the knight c3 is different from knight d2 is because if you move your knight to c3, the bishop comes to b4 to pin your knight to the king. Remember, your knight is the piece defending the pawn on e4. But in the Taraj variation, when you move your knight to d2, the bishop pin doesn't work because you have the c3 move. Right? So we have the Taraj, we have the Winawa, but the position I'm going to talk to us today is called the advanced variation, when you move the pawn to e5. So prior to moving the pawn, there is a tension in the center square right here. There's a tension. Tension means you have pieces attacking each other, or pawns. Anytime there's a tension, what you really want to do is keep it as much as possible, and the only time you want to ease the tension is when it's favorable for you. You don't want to ease the tension and then let your opponent get the advantage. All right? So right now, white plays e5. White eases the tension. No more pressure on the central squares. Now we have a fixed pawn structure. Now we have the e5 pawn and the d4 pawn. Now if you look at the e5 pawn, the e5 pawn can be very annoying for black because it stops the knight from coming to the most natural square, which is the f6 square. Okay? So now black is turned to move. And I like to ask questions. What would be an ideal move for black in this position? What should black be looking to do in this position?
97.
Sorry?
97.
97 is a possibility. Trying to develop your pieces. Any other choices?
C5.
C5 is a possibility. Any other choices?
What's wrong with F6?
F6 is also another possibility. So I'm going to talk about the 2 moves, the F6, because they're kind of similar. Now, anytime you're playing against the pawn chain, this is a pawn chain. A pawn chain is the pawns connected that are protecting each other, pretty much. So this is a pawn chain. So anytime you see a pawn chain, you want to break a pawn chain. You can either break it from the base or from the top. Now the danger of this is because you might get a king exposed on that diagonal. So the most logical move for black here is to break this pawn by attacking this pawn. So c5 is the most logical move in this position. So pretty much if I can capture this pawn, this is going to be weak, because this is the only pawn protecting the pawn on e5. So after the move c5, which is the most logical move in the advanced variation, white plays c3. What's the idea of the move c3? Protect, yeah.
And maintain the center.
Maintain the center, protect the pawn. Now, this is it. Based on principles. Anytime you have a pawn chain, you want to keep it as long as possible. Because what a pawn chain does is it limits the mobility of your opponent's pieces. The pawn chain stops your opponent's pieces from moving freely. So that's why whenever you're playing against the pawn chain, you want to break the pawn chain. So after the move c3, now c3 is pretty much saying, I'm going to maintain this pawn for as long as possible. So black said, well, not really. I'm going to put more pressure on that pawn. I'm going to move my knight to c6. What's the knight doing? Pressure here. So already we have a plan, we have a game. The whole game is not about the pawns in the center. The pressure that is being put by black on the white center pawns. Now there are a couple of moves white can play here. Now, every move we have to make here has to do something with the pawn chain here. Now, taking the pawn is never an option. Because when you capture this pawn, now this pawn is going to be left-handed. And by capturing this pawn, you're going to bring your opponent's pieces into the game with tempo. So you don't want to do that. So right now, what white normally do in a situation like this is to move his knight to f3. What's the point of knight to f3? Maintaining the pressure, right? Maintaining the pressure on the d4 square.
Why not f4?
Oh, that's a good question. Now, f4 is another possibility. F4 is another possibility. But this is one thing we have to be careful about, making a move like f4. It is alright to create a pawn chain, but when you make too many pawn moves without your pieces in the game, it can actually work against you. One of the problems why f4 can be very detrimental to white is because of this diagonal. Because when you play f4, all of a sudden this is weak, this is weak. Because while this pawn is on f2, this is kind of taken care of by the pawn. So if you move your pawn to f4, you're going to have to leave the bishop to defend the dark squares. That means you can't afford to lose your bishop or trade it for another piece. Because if you do, then the weaknesses here is going to be so big that you have to deal with it for the rest of the game. f4 is definitely a possible move. And but most of the time, knight f3 is played. Actually, there was a game that I saw today, which it's a very old game. f4 was played in the game, and after the move f4, white plays queen to b6. What's the point? Pressure on the pawn.
Knight f3.
Knight f3. Move the knight to f3, right? After knight f3, black plays bishop to d7. What's the idea of the bishop to d7?
Castle.
Not really. Now, let me say something about that. Castling to this part of the board will be very dangerous. Because you remember you already initiated an attack here with your c-pawn. That c-pawn is supposed to protect your king. So already if you play c5 and castle here, so you're telling your opponent to come get you. Because he's just going to exchange and then move his pawns, and all of a sudden, instead of you trying to create some play, you're the one trying to defend. Because your king is on the wrong part of the board.
Okay.
So after the move, the idea of the bishop d7 is to vacate the c8 square for the rook. You know, all of a sudden it's kind of similar to Sicilian, based on the fact that in the Sicilian defense, there's always a lot of play on the c file. So what black normally does in the Sicilian is create play on the queen side before doing anything even with his king. So this is a game that I saw today. So after bishop to d7, right? Now, white wants to develop his knight, but he cannot do that right now because I have 1, 2, 3 attacking d4. I have 1, 2, 3 protecting d4. So what does white do? He moves his queen to d3. was the point of queen d3? Trying to move the knight to d2 so that when the knight goes to d2, it's not blocking the queen from defending the pawn on d4.
Yeah, and of course the C1 bishop can't move because the queen is tied in.
Yes, exactly. You can't move because of that. So after the move queen d3, black plays rook to c8. Notice that black hasn't touched any of the pieces on the king side. There's a reason. Even though the king is still stuck in the center of all these pieces, there is absolutely nothing white can do to do anything about this king. You know why? He's busy trying to defend the pawn on d4. So you can't be defending and attacking at the same time. It's not going to work unless you're some kind of Houdini, right? So with the pressure here, even though the king is on e8, it's difficult for white to create any attack. Actually, if you try to create any attack, you're just going to overstretch yourself, and then this falls, and then your king is compromised. So after the move rook to c8, white plays a3. a3. Now, white has played a number of pawn moves. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawn moves. That's a lot of pawn moves. You know, and white has how many pieces developed? 2. How many minor pieces? Just 1, plus a major piece, right? Black has how many minor pieces developed? 2, plus 2 major pieces. Think about that. So don't let the result of this game surprise you. Just think about that. White has just 1 major piece developed, right? And a minor piece. Black has 2 minor pieces developed and 2 major pieces. So after the move a3, black decides, since there is no more way to put pressure on d4 from this side, he decides to look for another way to put pressure on d4. Who can come up with a move for black in this position?
Knight to h6.
Knight to h6, very good. Knight to h6. Exactly, trying to come to f5. Remember, right from the opening, everything is about what? The d pawn. The d pawn. So the moment somebody errs, the game is over. So after knight to h6, black plays.
What?
Sorry, white. White plays. White plays b4. No, sorry. It's white's move, right?
Yeah.
White plays b4, right? Okay, after b4.
White is living dangerous. Why don't they
Another pawn move, right? Another pawn move. Remember, we have just 2 minor pieces, a major and a minor. So another pawn move. So like I said, when things go wrong, don't say, oh, you know what? Yeah, we know. We have 3 major minor pieces, 2 major pieces. You used to have just a queen and knight with several pawn moves. You know, the bad thing about a pawn move is once your pawn moves forward, you cannot move backwards. So for every pawn move you make on the board, you have to weigh. You have to make sure that pawn move really makes sense. So at this point, black captures on d4. He captures back, right? Captures. So 1, 2 attacking, 1, 2 defending. So black says, you know what? Please suggest a move for black here. Yeah.
Knight to f5.
Knight f5. It's about the pawn on d4. Right from move 2. It's about the pawn on d4. Knight f5. Knight f5. Now I want to capture the pawn here. Now somebody said something about not being able to move the bishop earlier. Because if you move the bishop, you're going to lose the pawn, right? That's why the b pawn was moved. Now there's pressure here. So what does white do here?
What's the bishop gonna be too?
Oh yeah. It's like we knew when this game was played, right?
Yeah.
Bishop b2. Now attacking this. Now here is where everything came to a standstill. Normally I would have set up this position and say it's black to play and win. So there we go. It's black to play and win. Yeah. It's black to play and win. What's the best move for black in this position? It's black to play and win. And then don't let's be surprised that black is winning. I keep saying that because white pretty much set up himself for destruction.
Are you saying black to play to win?
Black to play and win the game.
Knight takes A4.
Knight to take.
B4.
Okay, now tell me the idea behind the knight takes. Okay, knight takes before, 8 takes before.
Knight takes. Knight takes.
Knight takes before, 8 takes before.
Yep.
What do you do after
Bishop
that?
takes B4.
Bishop takes. I'm just going to move my king to F2. So you have 2 pawns for the piece. What else do you have? And then my king is not looking so good.
If the queen captures.
Now you have. So your king is moving.
Yeah.
Actually, you capture this, I captured that, you captured this, I just move my king.
No, the dark square, right, Bishop. That was a white square.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you captured this, so my king goes to F2. So, like I say, you have 2 pawns for the piece, and my king is weak.
And now,
How do you continue this?
Bishop B5.
Bishop what?
B5.
Nope.
Bishop B5. You're gonna lose a piece with check.
How about that rook on C8 down to
Oh,
C2?
no, I'm sorry. I thought I'm looking at the
Rook where?
piece.
Once rook on C8 down to C2.
C2? What's the point of that move? Can I
Oh,
take it?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
Somewhere. Oh, geez, yeah, no.
So what do we do here?
Okay, I
We're
got
gonna
it.
go back. I like the fact,
Okay.
I'm gonna show you
I
something.
see.
I'm gonna show you something. I like the fact you consider taking on B4, right? I like the fact you consider taking on B4. Well, here's the question. You can
Instead
take care
of
of the
bishop,
bishop.
do it with the queen.
You could take the bishop, the knight, the queen. Choices. So we can't just see one and go for it. Like, what I expect you to do is think about the possible moves and then see which of them works best and then bring it up. Patience. So the right move is bishop takes b4.
Right.
Check. Sorry, king, come back here, king. Bishop takes b4, check. Right? So you have to take. If you don't take, you're down a pawn, right?
Oh, yeah.
Down we have knight takes b4. Attacking the queen, threatening knight c2 check,
Right.
right? So the queen moves to a safe square, right? The queen moves to a safe square. Let's say d2. Would that make sense? Can we move to d2?
I don't know.
Okay, where do we want to move to? You can't go to c2. You're just gonna.
No. Rook to C2.
So where do we move the queen to? Where do we move the queen to?
Wow.
E2, you gotta move to E2.
E2?
Yeah, because the rook is following with rook C2 now.
So if I play rook to c2, what do you do?
Well, that hangs the bishop.
That
Rook
wow.
c2, what do you do?
Queen has to move
Where?
to D1.
D1.
The only square he has.
And now
So what if I play knight e? No, knight e3. Keep looking for choices. Knight e3, attack the queen. Don't worry about the bishop. Bishop's not going anywhere. When you see a good move, you look for another one. Yeah. When you see a good move, look for another one.
Trouble.
Now we're saying, wow, trouble. But guess what? White started this game with how many pawn moves? Several. You come on, you can't. There is no magic you're gonna make that white is gonna all of a sudden is winning. It doesn't work like that. It's like having a fast break 5 against 2. Come on. Even though you are 2 Yannis, you have no choice. You have no chance. 0. You have no chance.
Yeah.
So the game now, this game was played in 1850 between Mcconnell, who's an amateur, and Paul Morphy, while he was 13 years old. But this is what happened in the game. Let me show you what happened in the game. This is what happened in the game. After the knight takes, the queen went to d2. Well, still the same thing. So I was thinking, well, knight check, pick the rook. He says, no. When you see a good move, you look for another one. It attacks the queen. The queen goes to d1, and then knight e3. I mean, like, it was way beyond this time. It was way beyond this time. I'm telling you, like, when it was playing like this, nobody on earth was even close. Think about it for 1 minute. This is in 1850. And he was 13 years old while this game was played.
Making sacks.
He was 13.
It was what?
He was 13 years old. He was 13 years old when this game was played.
It was 15, what?
13 years old. He just turned a teenager, yeah. He was 13
Paul
years old
Morphy
when,
was
yeah,
13
Paul Morphy
years
was
old.
13 when he played this game. The fast back, the highlights was pretty much the pawn structure. When you have a pawn structure, how do you go about playing? You know, that's one. Then the number two thing is the development of your pieces. I mean, we were all here when Black was putting his pieces on good squares and White was doing what? Pushing pawns. And all of a sudden, after a couple of moves, White just was stopped. Now think about it. This is not doing anything. 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 So many moves. Just this is like, think about it. This is unbelievable. In the year 1850, I don't think taxes was created then. No, that's why, you know, when you talk about one of the greatest ever, you always have to mention Paul Morphy, because it was way beyond his time, way beyond his time. The only person that also played crazily like this was Mcconnell Tower. Guess which year Mcconnell Tower reigned? In the night, yeah, like almost 100 years later on. Yeah, so the white problem started. Now, remember when you suggested move f4?
Yeah.
Imagine this pawn was here. Does this knight have the square f4? You don't. You know, so when you're making a move, that's like a pawn move, you have to wait before you make it. Personally, there are some moves I wouldn't make. I'll feel uncomfortable because I know there might be trouble later on. There might. Now think about it. Remember what I said? If your pawn is here, you better have a bishop defending that. But where's the bishop? There you go. But guess what? It didn't come here on its own. It was forced to come here to do what? Defend the pawn. So when you're playing, you have to try to, okay, what might happen later on? Based on the position, you could actually read the position and have an idea of what to call. Yeah. So, of course, we could say that White pretty much ignored his development and he paid a heavy price for it. You know, White pretty much forgot about developing his pieces and the heavy price was paid for that. So the other opening I want to talk about is the